Okay. Hosea chapter 4, verse 6. We've looked at this one before. I'm sure you have it underlined. If you found Daniel, it's right after Daniel. If you found Joel, you went too far. Hosea chapter 4. Verse 6. Hosea 4:6 says, "My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge." Boy, if there is ever a truer statement, I don't know what it is. You remember the last thing that Jesus basically said before he was carried off up to heaven after the resurrection? He says to his disciples, he says, "Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always, even unto the end." He also said to Peter, on a personal note before he left, he said, "Feed my sheep." I'll venture to say that of all the churches in America today that are what you would call, fundamental or good, that 90% of every message preached in America today by halfway decent churches came and fell under two categories: either salvation or how to feel good about yourself. I've been a Christian now for almost 50 years. More than half of that time, I've sat in pews myself. And I would venture to say that when I look back over my Christian experience in fundamental, born-again Baptist churches, of which I basically grew up in, that I can remember times that out of a 52-week year, that I would go to a particular church and sit there in the pew for 52 weeks, let's say, and out of those 52 weeks, we're going to get 45 messages on salvation. We're going to get maybe 10 messages on how to feel good about yourself, and then the rest, 7 or 8 messages, depending on what time of the year it is. It might be a Christmas message, it might be an Easter message, it might be a missionary drive, it might be a collection thing, an offering message, and so forth. But for the most part, it's going to be about salvation, or it's going to be about feeling good about yourself. Now, obviously, I've got no problem with messages on salvation. Where I do have a problem is that when you have a church composed of basically saved people, they do not have to hear a salvation message 50 weeks a year. I mean, how many variations can you have on salvation? And unfortunately, this almost sounds like heresy. Another preacher hearing this thing today, they're going to think I've really gone off the track here. But on a practical standpoint, a Christian does not have to hear 45, 50 messages a year on how to get saved. This is not, I am convinced, what Jesus meant when he said, "Feed my sheep." And he wasn't referring in that statement when he said to Peter, "Oh, there's a flock of sheep out there. I want you to make sure they got lots of grass and water." That's not what he's talking about when he says, "Feed my sheep." He's talking about Christians who are sitting under a pastor, a shepherd, if you please, and being fed the Word of God. Once you're saved, you're supposed to move on. That was one of the frustrating things that Paul had when he addresses the Corinthians, when he addresses some of these other churches, that the people were stuck in a rut. They weren't growing. They weren't learning anything new. And he says, "I would like to give you some meat, but you're still a bunch of babies. You've just heard the same message over and over and over and over again. You're not growing. So I can't explain to you the mysteries of the kingdom of God. I can't explain to you the mysteries and the glories that are out there. You've got to start growing. You've got to start learning. And it's the pastor's job, it's the preacher's job to make sure that the sheep are fed. The New Testament pattern, basically, primarily because of the political climate in which the early church started. During the Roman era, the Roman Caesars and so forth, politically, it was almost a death sentence to declare yourself as a Christian. You'd either get strung up, you'd get thrown to the lions in the Colosseum, you'd be arrested, you'd be killed. It wasn't an easy time to declare yourself as a Christian. And so for the most part, the talking about Jesus from an evangelistic standpoint came in the marketplace. Christians got together to encourage each other, to teach each other, to help each other, to encourage each other in the light of the political climate in which they lived. They did not, as a rule, if you were meeting in a house, let's say, or you're meeting in a cave, or you're meeting in a grove of trees someplace out of sight of the average person, you did not, as a rule, invite lost people into that company of people. If you had a little church home, you generally did not invite the lost to come to that home and begin to teach them about Jesus. You did this in the marketplace. So you weren't going to put everybody else in jeopardy. When you met in the home, it was generally nothing but Christians in there who would, again, they would teach, they would learn, they would talk about Jesus, they would trade stories about the apostles or what they did. It was a very in-close house arrangement. When you were in the workplace, when you were in the marketplace, that was where you were supposed to do the evangelization. You'd go to other people's homes. That's why in the early book of Acts, when this whole church thing was exploding, it says, daily in the temple and in every house, they ceased not to teach and preach Jesus Christ. So you would go to your friend's house and tell them about Jesus. And then once they got saved, you'd invite them into the church itself. You go back out to somebody else's house, or you get a worker, or you get a friend, or you get somebody at school, and you'd tell them about Jesus, and they'd get saved. You'd invite them into the church. And this is how the church grew. But over the years, we somehow changed this pattern in that now the church is the place of evangelization. The average church is where you go now to get saved as such. We completely turned it around. And so the Christians, the sheep, if you please, get together on Sunday morning, and they only hear what should be told in the marketplace, what should be told in the workplace, in the school place, how to get saved. You, by the fact that you're sitting there, implies that you know how to get saved. You're already saved. And yet most pastors, they waste 50 weeks a year on telling their own saved people how to get saved. And someone says, well, yeah, but what if there's one person that comes in? Don't we owe it to them? Aren't we obligated to them? Yeah, we're supposed to teach them and tell them how to get saved, but not at the expense of everybody else in growing. Take that person aside. Show them how. Encourage them. Help them. But the church is not being fed. The church is not growing. And as a result, we see here in Hosea 4:6, it says, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. The average Christian can't comment on 90% of this Bible. The average Christian has no idea the Bible stands on astronomy, let's say. The average Christian probably doesn't have a clue that there's anything astronomical in this book. The average Christian has no idea that meteorology is in here, astronomy is in here, technology is in here. I mean, you just go right down the line. It's all in here. But we don't know that. And so we have painted ourselves as a bunch of doofuses, a bunch of holy rollers, a bunch of ignoramuses that have a one-track mind to the exclusivity of everything else. And so it's no wonder the world looks down on us. And about the only people that seem to get on TV are these idiots just wanting nothing but money and how to get healed when they themselves are dying of cancer and dying of this and dying of everything else that you can shake a stick at, getting in trouble in every possible way they can get in trouble. It seems that these are the only people that seem to gravitate to any exposure that we have in this world today. So it's no wonder that the world has a certain preset disposition against Christians. We've let the world take away science from us. We've let the world take away technology from us. We've let the world take away everything good and wonderful about the majesty of this book, and we're treated like little kids told to sit in the corner because all we know is, David and Goliath and Noah's Ark, of which the world says they're all fables anyway. The average Christian couldn't tell you how big that ark was. The average Christian couldn't tell you how many animals did hold in that ark. The average Christian couldn't tell you how long they were in the ark, who put them in the ark, why they were in the ark, anything else. And so the world has set us aside and made us a laughing stock. And the average Christian just sits there going, hubbada, 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 hubbada. We don't know what to do to get out of it. So we're like little kids, told to sit in the corner, shut up, don't speak until you're spoken to. We say, okay. We can't comment on technology. We can't comment on science because we don't have a PhD after our name, maybe, or an MA, or an MS. We've let the world steal it all from us. We're so politically correct for fear that we're going to offend somebody, that we're going to make somebody mad, that we're going to paint ourselves as a bunch of jerks. Well, I'll let you know, we can't look any jerkier than we already do in the world's eyes. I've said this before, and I'll probably say it 100 more times in these next few weeks that we're talking on the subject. The creative power of God is expressed through the medium of word, the spoken word. That is the overt manifestation of the power of God. It's not raining fire down from heaven. He can do that, obviously. It's not bringing a flood on the earth. He can do that, and he has done that. The manifest power of God has always been expressed through the medium of the spoken, uttered word. And God said, there comes light. How many years did Einstein sit there trying to figure out the concept of light? He was probably about the best that we have to offer up. Took him years. Is light a particle? Is light a wave? What is light when you break it down? We came up with prisms, and we could see the light go through the prism and then divide into various colors and so forth. And that shook everybody up. And then we got super-duper high-tech spectrums, and we're analyzing the different properties of light. We can gauge the speed of light. We can do all this stuff with light. but we can't make light. And when God wanted to make light, he didn't sit here with a handful of molecules and atoms and begin to juggle these things in certain manipulative forms and so forth. He just utters the words, "Let there be light." In the first chapter of Genesis, that expression, "and God said," is uttered 10 times. Every time he says it, something unbelievable takes place. Stars are made. Planets are made. Light is formed. Do you realize that light came before there was any sun, moon, or stars? You know, when somebody's going through the first 2 chapters in the book of Genesis, and they begin the sequence and stuff, and they start off with, in verse 3, "And God said, let there be light," and then they get down to around verse 14 or so, when it says, "Oh yeah, and then God made the sun and the moon," the wheels just fall off. Whoa, whoa, whoa! You mean there was light before the sun? Yeah. Go back to square one and try to figure that one out for a while. What is the essence of light then? If it's not a part of the sun, what is light? Well, we've let the world explain these things. That's our problem as Christians. Because the average Christian doesn't know his Bible good enough even to realize, gee whiz, I never thought of that before. I never even knew that before, that there was light before the sun. I thought all light emanated from the sun. I'm not talking flashlights and batteries here, or matches. We're talking about the essence of light itself. Average Christian, when they realize that there was light before the sun, it just spooks them out. And they give up. Well, okay, I'll let Darwin and the guys explain all this. I'll let Stephen Hawking explain all that. I'll let all these other guys explain that because that's way above me. So 10 times in the first chapter of this book, God lays out the ground rules. He said, look, I'm going to speak some things. I'm going to say some things, and these things are going to come to pass. Now, it doesn't take a mental giant to realize that God has something going here for himself. If he can just speak and worlds come into being, wow, I think I'm going to listen to him now. If I realize that from the utterance of his lips, universes, galaxies are formed, I think next time I read that little expression in the Bible, "and God said," I think I'm going to take extra care in trying to read and understand what was it that he just got done saying. Psalm 33. Psalm 33, verse 6. In Psalm 33, 6 it says, "By the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth." Wow, that's an amazing thing. When you stop and think about it, the power encapsulated in I don't even know how to describe what a word is. It's sound, it's vibrations that come, emanate from my vocal cord, that go through the larynx and go through the nasal and the sinuses and so forth, that come out the mouth. They hit the air. They vibrate a certain way, and your ear picks it up, that little anvil inside there, the little hairs and so forth, and all that mechanism goes into place, and somehow, by the miracle of God, we're able to understand and comprehend words. It's an amazing thing when you think about it, what's involved here. You and I although we have the promise of being able to do the same basic thing, in other words, make things out of words, when we read the verses, we didn't believe the verses, and therefore we don't do it. That's simple. But there's certain things that we can do with words. There's certain things that we have the power to do. You remember the old adage, sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me? Well, that sounds really good when you're a, school kid out there getting the, tar beat out of you type thing. But we all know that words do hurt. I mean, words can, really and truly, words can hurt worse than things can hurt you. You can throw a rock and hit me upside the head. That's going to hurt, obviously. But it's not going to hurt in the same way. It's not going to hurt to the depth of my heart and soul as if you say something that would hurt me. So we can see just in this little limited way that we even have the capacity to effect change, to make things happen, to destroy somebody, to uplift somebody, just with the power of our words. If I come up to some stranger on the street and say, you're the ugliest thing I've ever seen in my life, I don't know how you can walk around without a sack over your head. You're an offense to everybody. Cover up. Well, that's going to hurt him. It's going to hurt him a lot, maybe. But if I come up to somebody that I love, if I come up to somebody that trusts me, maybe, and I say the same type of thing, I have now hurt them exponentially. And maybe they'll never get over it. Maybe it will affect them for the rest of their lives in some detrimental way. We have an unbelievable capacity to hurt or to help just with the power of our voices. God has taken it to obviously an entirely different level. I mean, he can literally create with the power of his voice. But we can see in a limited way how this works just because of the power that we can exert with our voice, our tongue, and so forth. We have this same ability, as it were. So by the word of the Lord were the heavens made. Kids are going to go off to school. You're going to get astronomy maybe. You're going to get evolution. You're going to get physics. You're going to get all kinds of things that you're going to learn. And you're going to learn that science says that the worlds were made by the latest consensus now is what we refer to as the Big Bang. Now, they don't really understand the Big Bang. They kind of have a model that they set up, but they don't really understand conclusively. And they never will until God comes back, because you see, one of the criteria for science is that you have to have, you postulate a theory, you experiment, you test that theory, you come to certain conclusions, and then if everything bears out, then you can come up with a relatively safe conclusion. Well, there wasn't anybody around at the Big Bang. We don't know what exactly happened there. They say that they can infer by what they see now, and that they can extrapolate back in time. If the universe is expanding, for instance, they say, well, it stands to reason that if you just take the reverse of that it all had to come back to a certain specific starting point. And so now they begin to think, okay, how did the universe begin? Well, I'm looking every way I can, and I see it expanding every way I can. Therefore, there had to have been a central point of which everything originated from. They can't come up with a power source for it, and so they say, well, we'll just call it a Big Bang. It just kind of went poof and everything started. And that gets them through the day. Now they'll write a book on it. They'll write papers back and forth. They'll encourage each other. They'll educate each other. They'll come up with a certain list of buzzwords and so forth that only they, because they spent, $40,000 a year going to Caltech or going, to Stanford or wherever it happens to be, so that they can learn all these little buzzwords so that they can talk to each other and exclude everybody else and make themselves pat on the back and think that they're really hot stuff because they've come up with this stuff that nobody else has access to. Well, God beat them by a long shot. He just simply says, look, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And you know what? In that first verse, when it says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, if the mechanical process of which God chose to use to create that heaven and the earth was a big bang, that, God says, okay, here's my little bit of matter right here in my hand. I'm going to blow on that thing, I'm going to blow it up, and I'm going to say the words, hocus pocus, let there be. And boom, it all is. If that's the method that God chose to do it, I've got no problem with that. But don't you come to me and try to take God out of the equation and tell me that you know how this universe began and keeping God out of the equation, because you don't. We've known for a long time that the universe is expanding. And then there came a time when they said, well, we understand the concept of gravity, that if I have a great big object here and a little object here, that little object is going to be drawn to the bigger object. Just the nature of physics. But the more they looked and the more they examined and the more they studied, they began to see that not everything was all the little falling into the big, that there is a dispersal going on. There is an expansion going on. Now they began to scratch their heads. Well, if we have gravity, how can everything be expanding at the same time? It goes against the whole concept of gravity. Gravity pulls. Gravity gravitates. That's where the word comes from, gravitates. But they notice that it's expanding. And it's not only expanding, it's getting faster and faster, the expansion. So now they say to themselves, what's going on here? Not only is it expanding, which goes against the whole concept of gravity, now it's getting faster and faster and faster. And then they come up with their little concept of something called dark matter. That maybe there's other things in this galaxy that we can't see that is making gravity work the opposite, let's say. Maybe there's something else out there that is exerting more gravity and more pull than what's in here, and therefore now it's expanding out towards this other gravitational stuff. Well, that didn't quite satisfy them, the whole thing, and so they went on to this thing called dark energy and tried to explain all this stuff by, first they got the dark matter, then they got the dark energy. That didn't quite do it, and then they come up with a third one. Now it's called dark force. All three of them, they didn't suppress or supplant each one. They got all three going. We got dark matter, we got dark energy, and now we got dark force, because they're trying to explain why things are happening that are going against all the models that they have come up with. And they can't explain it any other way. They can't go back and say, gee whiz, we were wrong. They just have to keep adding other stuff to it to try to explain it. I read a verse or two in the Bible that says God is spirit. I read a verse or two in the Bible that says God is every place. I've read a verse or two in the Bible that says that God is in everything. That God is everywhere. if I didn't know better, if I took the word dark matter, dark energy, and dark force and replaced it with the word God, I can see this all through the Bible. We have matter. Your matter, floors matter, air is matter, water's matter, everything is matter. Matter is composed of molecules. Molecules are made up from atoms. Atoms are made up of three principal parts: protons, neutrons, and electrons. Protons are made up of what we call quarks. Quarks are made up from what we call gluons. And they think that maybe gluons are made from something called bosons. You are getting down to an infinity of teeniness that the brain can't even wrap itself around. Aluminum foil. I don't know. I can't even put my fingers, close enough together to make an aluminum foil thing. If you take that vertical line between the bottom part of the aluminum foil and the top part of the aluminum foil, and obviously this is, 1,000 times bigger than it really is, but if you take and add up the atoms in between the bottom and the top of the aluminum foil, there's approximately 250,000 atoms high. That aluminum foil is 250,000. You can't even begin to imagine how tiny that is. Now, the classic little atom thing that we see, we have the nucleus, we have this little deal here, and we have this little deal there, the little spinny things. The atom isn't from this size here to this size here. That's not the atom. All these little circle things that you see depicted when we talk about an atom, those indicate orbits of the electrons and the protons. That's it. It's the orbit. If you squish that down to the nucleus part, the atom is just a little teeny, a billion times smaller than this thing that we represent. And if you take the little nucleus of the atom here, and you break that up into its three little parts, the neutrons, protons, and the electrons, those, again, are so tiny that we can't even figure it out. Take that little proton, and that's the one that has the quarks in it. How many billions of quarks go in one little proton? How many billions of protons go in one little atom? How many billions of atoms go in one little piece of skin cell? You see how it gets? The Bible makes it very, very clear when we turn over to Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 1, verse 20. Romans 1:20 says, "For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world," the invisible things, the atoms, protons, neutrons, these are invisible things. The quarks, the bosons, the gluons, the muons. All these invisible things are clearly seen. How are they seen? Being understood by the things that are made. Even his eternal power and godhood. So I see this microphone here, but the microphone is not just an homogeneous piece of stuff. It's composed of little teeny things, which are in turn composed of even teenier things, which are composed of even teenier, tinier things, and so on and so forth. These are the building blocks that God has used to make everything in this universe. Everything that you see, everything that you breathe, everything that you touch, everything that you hear is made up of things that you cannot see, hear, feel, or touch. Sound of my voice going through. There's something tangible there. Something is vibrating through the airwaves. The airwaves themselves are composed of molecules, composed of atoms. Everything that we see, hear, feel, or touch is made up of things that we cannot see, hear, feel, or touch. Now look at verse 21. Oh, no, finish 20 here. Let me start over. Verse 20. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood how? By the things that are made. Even his eternal power and Godhead. Remember it says, and he spake, and worlds came into being, so that they are without excuse. Because that, when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Once you approach God and see his creation, the Bible says the heavens declare the glory of God. The firmament showeth his handiwork. When you look at that and you ascribe that creation, when you ascribe that glory to something or somebody other than God, God's going to step in and he's going to start to mess with your head. Neither were they thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they've got all the buzzwords, they've got all the answers, they think. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, to birds, four-footed beasts, and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. Do you ever any reason why they want to find water so bad on Mars? Have you ever figured out why they want to find life on another planet so bad? They want to get rid of God. If you can find life on another planet, you can take this Bible and throw it out. If you can find the vestiges of a lost civilization on Mars, who needs God anymore? Why do you think we're spending trillions of dollars over these last 50, 100 years to find these things? They want to get rid of God. I'll end up with this one, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 3, and I'll stop here. Hebrews 11:3. Through faith. The world puts out faith. Oh, come on. Faith? We're scientific. We came up with experiments. We came up with hypotheses. We came up with conclusions. We verified this. We verified that. We're not like you stupid Christians just relying on faith. And we say, oh, okay. And so back to the corner we go. And we sit there and we let the world take it all away from us. Through faith, we understand that the worlds were framed by the Word of God, so that things which are seen were not made of things which do appear. God has a whole different program here. He works on a whole different level. And he tells us we better get with the program. In the next few weeks, we're going to look at the miracles of Jesus, for instance. And we're going to see that from a physics standpoint, from a quantum mechanics standpoint, it's pure miracle. Everything that Jesus did, he was simply manipulating the building blocks, the little muons, quarks, molecules, atoms, and so forth. All a miracle is just being able to manipulate these little building blocks. So a 180-pound guy can walk on water. A 180-pound guy can walk through a wall. A 180-pound guy can levitate and go up to third heaven. He's just simply manipulating the building blocks of which he designed this world around. So a miracle isn't just a big hocus-pocus thing that you've got to suspend all reason, got to suspend all intellect, got to suspend all common sense to believe. Just look at it from simply the standpoint that you know how to manipulate the building blocks of life. And if you can do that, you can do a miracle. Jesus did it all day long. The scary thing of it is, he says, the works that I do, you should do them too. All right, we'll pick up next week and keep on going here. Father, I can't thank you enough for this book. I thank you. I praise you. Your majesty, your glory, the simplicity, the complexity. I mean, everything is encapsulated in you. The very concept that a universe can be formed by simple words. It's amazing. And yet you did it all day long, Father. I bow to your majesty. I bow to your greatness. You truly are very God of very God. I stand in awe. I humble myself before you. I ask you, please, help me in these next few weeks to be able to convey some of the majesty, some of the glory, some of the awe-inspiring things that are you to these people. God, let them be receptive and attentive and take these things to heart. Help us as Christians not to be made to feel like second-class, low-class, stupid idiots, made to sit in a corner someplace while the rest of the world goes on to so-called greatness. The world has nothing on this book. The world has nothing on you. Bless your people, Father, I pray. In Jesus' name.
Once there was an old-time preacher who had a church on the outskirts of town. You'd never call him a mild-mannered teacher. He was a shouter right down to the ground. He had a red-letter King James Bible. It opened up to John 3:16. I first heard him at a summer revival. He rolled up his sleeves and he started to sing. He said, you must confess your sin. He said, you must be born again. He preached Jesus, crucified and risen from the dead. He said, you gotta make it right. He said, you need to come tonight. The Spirit grew stronger with every single passage he read. I got saved when I heard what he said. He said, well, I'm a member of that little church now, but the preacher died a long time ago. He was preaching on the street when God called him. Now he's a shouting up in heaven, I know. We're still moving in the right direction, and we're following the way that he led. We got that old-time preacher's conviction, and I still remember just what he said. What he said. He said,